But it's in the monasteries, in the nunneries, where many of these texts are preserved, and they've been largely forgotten. People say, why is the code there?
Yeah.
And I say, I don't know. All I know is that when I followed the instructions in a 3,000-year-old text and I applied it to the periodic table, this is what we have. Yeah. Next question, is it a coincidence? That this world influences our everyday lives. We're told that we're limited in our lives only until we wake up to the parameters of this unseen world. This droplet of water cannot possibly store that amount of information. They were pumping tremendous amounts, libraries of information into this chip. And the mystery was, where's the information being stored? And they realized that the information was not confined to the droplet of water. And what they found was no surprise. The vessel showed that these photons are completely random. Every human heart has a field of energy that extends beyond the physical heart. And that field, it is an electrical and a magnetic field that we can measure with conventional equipment. So the question is the DNA influenced by the emotions of another person? Can our emotions actually influence the DNA in our bodies? Before I tell you the experiment, let me just share a little bit about why this is important.
Greg, welcome back to Beyond
George,
Belief.
it's an honor to be here, and I'm really excited to talk about this material.
I
today.
love you. I've always loved your work. I mean, it's just thought-provoking. How did this all start for you? Let's go back to the beginning.
You want to go back to the beginning? We're filming in Denver, Colorado, and it began right here in Denver, Colorado, or in the Rocky Mountain area. Mm-hmm. I was, a lot of our viewers don't know this, behind the scenes, I worked in the defense industry during the last years of the Cold War, a very frightening time. And
indeed,
in the history of our world, when the two superpowers at the time did the unthinkable and actually created, they spent the energy, the manpower, the resources, the technology to create the weapons to microwave the Earth many times over in the event that nuclear war ever occurred. It was during that time, George, if you can imagine, I found myself working behind the scenes writing software for the missile program, supporting that effort by day. And by night, ever since I was young, I've been a scholar of some of our most ancient and cherished spiritual traditions and some of the most mysterious texts of our past. And I have felt for a very long time, George, that if we knew where to look in the past, that we would find the key and perhaps a message from our ancestors that would help us to transcend the differences that have led to the great wars of the 20th and now the 21st century, and at that time, the kind of war that I was supporting. So it was during that time that I began a search and a research of comparative traditions, helping us to understand our origins. Because my thinking was, if we could find a way to show beyond any reasonable doubt, beyond the superficial, outward demonstrations, that we are actually we are one. And for some people, it's a very New Age sounding hope or wish, but I think there's a lot of power in showing that unification is possible, helping us to transcend those differences. So my journey began to take me back into older and older and older texts, cutting through the red tape.
And we're almost obsessed with it.
And the religions, well, I would say passionate. I prefer passion over obsession. My wife would probably say I was obsessed.
Yeah.
So, because the clues, every time I would find a clue, George, and I think, okay, maybe this is it, and then it's not going to go anywhere else, it would open the door to something else, and open the door to something else. And that led me from the textbooks onto a series of journeys. My first journey was in Egypt in 1986. And what I found in Egypt on the temple walls led me into the highlands of the Andes Mountains of southern Peru, which directed me right into the Tibetan plateau and the temples and the monasteries in Tibet. As a scientist, my thinking is, if I'll speak about myself personally, if I can find the information least disturbed by the modern world, that's where it will be most intact. And to go to those places, you've got to make the effort to get there. They're some of the most magnificent, beautiful, remote, isolated, pristine places remaining on the world. Did I say remote, by the way? Because they are. But it's in the monasteries, in the nunneries, where many of these texts are preserved, and they've been largely forgotten.
Truly amazing texts.
Well, they are. So as I began my search, my thinking was, if we could really pin down our origins, the science, the best science of the 21st century is now overturning so many of Darwin's ideas. And by the way, Darwin was open to that. He was willing for his ideas to fall. He viewed them as stepping stones toward greater understandings. So Darwin was okay with that. And I began to see a connection in the texts that was not accounted for in the theories of evolution. And it is a connection that is very controversial today. Now, Darwin didn't have access to the tools and the technology. He certainly didn't have the DNA databases that we have today. So this is where I began. Part of my job in software development was in writing pattern recognition software. And I've searched patterns ever since I was a kid.
So you applied it to this.
Sure, it comes very naturally for me. I used to look at flashing patterns on blinking lights on Christmas trees, and I mean, you see them everywhere. So I thought, if there are patterns in nature, and we are nature, they should show up in our DNA. And it was in the 80s when the DNA databases, we could actually begin to access them without being part of the research projects. So to make a long story really brief, what I found was in one of the most obscure and ancient of the texts, a book called the Sefer Yetzirah.
What is that?
It is a Hebrew text that has only been translated a couple of times of a couple of authors into English. It's so mysterious, George, that very few scholars even want to talk about it because they don't know what to say about it. It's a brief text. It's only about 2,000 lines.
All right.
And it is written as if an observer were present the day that the Creator created humankind, step by step. However, it's written in a language that doesn't make a lot of sense to us
Is it like
today.
Genesis or totally different?
It's very different from Genesis. I think Genesis probably partially derived from this text, the Sefer Yetzirah, which is the book of creation. It literally translates to the book of creation. So it was as if someone were watching the Creator actually create the first person.
Doing what he did.
Doing what he did, but it is not written scientifically. The bottom line to what the text is saying is that through language, humankind was created. And that doesn't make a lot of sense.
Explain that.
If you take it literally. But as I began to follow the instructions as the author created them in this text, and this, George, to me, this is the power of transcending the boundaries between science and spirituality. Because if a scientist only looked at the elements of life, you'd never make this discovery. If you only look at the spiritual text, you would never make this discovery. But it's by blending the two together and allowing them to tell the story. So we today in modern science, we talk about life as the result of elements, and we describe elements through word and through number. So we have the periodic table, for example. Hydrogen, nitrogen, oxygen, carbon makes up the DNA of our bodies. Those are the words. And for every one of those words, there are a lot of numbers that may be applied. There are 17 different numeric parameters that go with each of those. So put that aside. When you go back into the ancient text and the Sefer Yetzirah specifically, they did exactly the same thing. They talked about the power of the letters of very specific alphabets. Now, it doesn't make a lot of sense to modern scholars until we begin to understand that every ancient alphabet, bar none, that I have found so far, has always from day one, with each letter, had a mysterious number associated with the letters. We don't know where the numbers came from. They never change.
Code?
It's a unique numeric code. The study of that code is called gematria, and it was actually formalized. The 32 laws of gematria were formed in the 2nd century. They were formalized in the 2nd century. And the only way gematria works is you cannot deviate from these laws. There are specific laws that apply to the numbers. So our ancestors were also talking about life using words and numbers. So they had the letters of the alphabets and this mysterious number. We're using the periodic table. We've got a whole bunch of numbers.
Right.
My job was to find out which of those numbers equates to the numbers in the ancient alphabets. And if I could do that, my thinking was it would be possible to look at human DNA, carbon, oxygen, hydrogen, nitrogen, and different combinations of that, and substitute the ancient letters for the numbers based upon this correlation. This, in retrospect, it was simple, but not knowing that, it took years.
Right.
It took me 12 years.
And did you break it?
To find what we now know is that the atomic mass of the elements, the numbers of the atomic mass, are the numbers that equate to the mysterious letters in the ancient alphabets. What that means is when you look at human DNA, or the DNA of any life, it is made of hydrogen, nitrogen, oxygen, carbon, and using gematria, the numbers that equate to those become 1, 5, 6, and 3. 3 is with the carbon. And when you then take a table, one of the ancient tables, and you're able to correlate those numbers with the letters, what we find, George, is that the human DNA is our genome is built in layers. And at the top layer, it's like every book has an introduction. The introduction in every cell of every form of life, carbon-based DNA, the introduction is the same. And the first translation literally reads, literal, God eternal within the body. God eternal within the body. And God that is depicted in the DNA is actually spelled the way that the name of God was spelled in the ancient text before it was removed 6,800 times. In the Torah, for example, the sacred name of God is believed to be so sacred it cannot be written in its entirety.
Why put it in a code?
You know, this was, so first as a scientist, what I have to say is this. People say, why is the code there?
Yeah.
And I say, I don't know. All I know is that when I followed the instructions in a 3,000-year-old text and I applied it to the periodic table, this is what we have. Yeah. Next question, is it a coincidence? So
there are no coincidences.
I had a statistician run the numbers for me, and the odds of this happening by chance are 1 to 234,256.
Yeah.
234,256 to 1 are the odd, or 0.00041%.
Right.
Those are the odds that it's just
random.
Just random. Now, those aren't astronomical odds. I thought it might be like 1 to a bajillion, you know. But when you take into account,
they're still high.
Not only is the language there, but when you take into account what the words say, that those words actually have meaning, God eternal within the body.
And they all say that.
The first letter in all human DNA, if you can look at what's called the genetic code, CTAG, every one of those is made up of combinations of carbon, oxygen, hydrogen, nitrogen, and they are arranged. I don't want to be really technical when I talk about this, but they're arranged different numbers of carbon, oxygen, hydrogen, nitrogen atoms. So within each of the DNA bases that make our DNA as it is, there are different combinations of CTAG that break down to different combinations of God eternal within the body. And the God within ourselves, within our DNA, is literally the same spelling of the God that was taken from those texts. Now here's the beauty, I just have to say this.
All right.
My first fear was I found it in the Hebrew language, and I said, does that mean, could it actually be divisive if it only is found in one language? And when the research went to its fruition, what we found is it is in Hebrew and Aramaic and Sanskrit, 3 of the root languages.
The same thing.
Exactly the same thing. So in Hebrew, Aramaic, and Sanskrit, the code for those letters translates precisely the same in the human DNA. That's the first layer.
In your opinion, that slogan, God eternal, is in the body. What did that mean?
What it tells me is because the odds of that happening by chance are
astronomical,
are steep, it tells me there's an intentionality. Now, who or what, I don't know the answer to that, but it tells me that that the DNA, the way it's formed, it is intentional. And then I began to think, in our modern world, we're creators, we're artists. Whenever we create something that we're proud of, when we're finished, what's the last thing we do when we finish it, George? You tell me, what is the last thing we do with something? We finish a painting, and what's the last thing we do when we finish that painting?
You sign it.
We put our name on it. If there's an intentionality underlying life itself and human life specifically, it would make tremendous sense to me that who or whatever is responsible would somehow have left a sign.
Is it God's signature?
I believe that however we define that, whatever we believe that creator is. My next question is, why not put it into a text or into a temple wall? And then my thinking was, why place that signature into something that can crumble over a few thousand years, like a temple wall, or into the pages of a book that can be destroyed? Why not put it in the creation itself? And as long as the creation exists, the message exists as well. I published this in 2004, even though the research was incomplete. It was complete to that point, and I wanted to share this with the world. 2007, Japanese scientists released a report, peer-reviewed report, on the feasibility of storing data in DNA for thousands of years. And what they were looking at is bacteria. They were looking at storing information in bacteria and placing the bacteria in nuclear waste dumps, for example.
And letting it sit there.
And letting it sit there because the papers might disintegrate or something else might happen.
Yeah.
But if they could do it. So 2007 was the first time they successfully implanted a message into the DNA of a bacteria. And they used bacteria because...
Hoping that someone in the future one day would use it?
Well, this was a test.
Yeah.
They used the bacteria because they have a short lifespan, so they could see how many generations, for a bacteria, the generations may be just a few days. So the code they put into the DNA, it was...
Don't say it was the same thing.
No, it was Einstein's theory of relativity. It was E equals mc squared in the year 1905. They encoded that into the DNA. They allowed the DNA to replicate for 25 generations.
With that code? With
the code. They pulled the code right out,
bizarre.
Completely intact. So what they're now demonstrating purely in the scientific realm is the feasibility of storing literal information in the genome, in the DNA, and it remains intact for as long as the organism remains intact.
Well, here's the puzzling part. If you put a code in there, you're doing it for one of several reasons. One, you're hiding it, or two, you're trying to pass information on to some future generation. So let's assume that that's what that is.
Yeah.
When we extract it and we get that code, what do we do with it? What's it mean?
I think it depends on what the code says. Now we know, and the work is progressing from this point. And in 2015, another layer will have been completely decoded, and hopefully you and I can have this conversation, and I'll share what we find next. The point is that there is a message encoded into the DNA of all human life that tells us beyond any reasonable doubt that the differences that divide us now are superficial differences, and that we have a common origin, a common ancestry. I was doing a conference in the D.C. area, and I made the statement, and I said, I would love to get my hands on some DNA from life that's not from this world, and if it's carbon-based life, and if the message is the same, then we know that we have a common
goal.
A common goal. And
wouldn't that be exciting?
Well, there's a man that came forward and said, when you're ready for that DNA, let me know.
He's got it?
I don't know.
Maybe from some Martian meteorite, right?
Know. There's, we don't know. We don't know. But
you're going to take him up on it?
I'm going to call him from your cell phone number, George, not from my cell phone number.
We'll block your number.
I'm not ready for that yet. When we were developing the algorithms, and they're very complex algorithms now to help look at the DNA in new ways. So here we are, we come full circle. We are at this crisis point in civilization when we're facing more crises of such great
than
magnitude
ever before, that I can remember.
Based on our division, on our separation. And if there is some way that we could bring forward in a really powerful, meaningful way, something that casts an entire new light on us as a family, and what that family means, I think it would give us a reason to look at things differently. It doesn't mean it would force us to. It means
Right.
it would give us a scientific reason to look at one another and think of ourselves very differently. I know for myself, once I found this code, I felt differently about myself, knowing that within every cell of my body, God eternal, it's YHVG, are the Hebrew letters. YH, Yah, is actually one of the forms of the name of God that we find in the Torah that was removed over 6,800 times.
Did it baffle you as to who put the code there?
I've sensed that there's an intentionality
From?
regarding us. And when we go to look now at Darwin's idea of evolution, 2,000 years ago, we appeared on this earth. We don't know where we came from, and what made us different from so many of the other forms of life was human chromosome number 2, the largest that had been fused with 2 telomere to telomere fusions. Geneticists acknowledge the fusion. They say we can't say how it happened.
But they know it happened.
And it did not happen under natural circumstance. They said this would not happen in nature. Something has forced this chromosome, or this telomere to telomere fusion between these 2 chromosomes. So I think what we're getting, George, is we've had a sense, so many people, that there's much more to us than evolution has led us to believe. It doesn't mean that evolution didn't occur. As a scientist, I can say it did, to a point. But there's a point where evolution does not explain our existence and cannot account for what we find. And I think this study, this kind of work, where we're crossing the traditional boundaries between science and spirituality. A scholar studying the text would never find this.
A scientist would.
Looking at the elements in the periodic table, or a geneticist would never find it because they're compartmentalized.
You need a combination.
But the world doesn't work that way. So we are gifting ourselves the ability to see the world as it is through what the world is sharing with us if we're open enough. But the science has to be rigid. It has to be based upon what science is telling us. So the periodic table describes the elements that make the DNA in our bodies. There's a mathematic link between that and the letters of the ancient alphabets. How that link got there, who put it there, I have no idea.
As I was flying here, Greg, from Los Angeles to Denver, and I'm looking around the plane, and there's all these people sitting on the plane, and it just dawns on me, and I do this a lot, every one of them is an individual. They've got their own little situation, their problems, their happiness, their families, every one of them. But the question I kept asking myself as I looked at this entire plane full of people, why? What's the reason? What are they here for? Some had briefcases, some had purses, some had tablets. Who are they? What are they? I still can't get that answer. You, of course, have brought up a series of 6 questions in one of our previous shows that asks those questions too. But will we ever get that answer? Why are we here?
I think we will have the answer, George. The question is, will we be willing to accept what the answer says to us?
Is it frightening?
I don't think it's frightening. We've asked science to tell us who we are.
And they don't tell us.
Well, science, pure science, is now revealing the information. It's not being accepted in the mainstream. So the textbooks in the classrooms are not accepting what the science is telling us.
What is it telling us?
For example, evolution. We'll just take evolution because that's on a lot of people's minds right now. In a public classroom, a teacher can only teach the curricula that's been approved by a school board.
Right.
All right. The school
You
board
can't deviate from
if
that.
the school board does not accept, even though it's peer-reviewed science, if the school board does not accept that, it cannot be taught. So we're teaching our young people. Or
that teacher gets fired.
Or the teacher gets fired. Yeah. We're teaching our young people the story of separation that has led to so many of the crises that we're seeing. It makes us feel separate from ourselves, from one another. And I've asked professors and friends of mine, I said, why can't you share this in the classroom? Why can't you share the science?
And they're petrified to share this, aren't they?
Before money, ego, power, and habit.
Yeah.
And one of the professors, he said, do you know, as a male, he said, do you know what that would mean to my 40-year career if I had to stand in front of a classroom and say everything I've taught until this point is no longer true? So to him, it would say he was a failure. What I said to him, I said, it would be a beautiful demonstration of the power of science in your ability to constantly update what science is telling us about our world. He said, do you know how much money it would cost to change the textbooks? And I said, well, look how much money we spend on the war, so, why not? Habit. He said, it is a habit to teach this. Now, it is changing, and it's changing slowly, George. And this is only one place. Evolution is only one place, but it's the place that's directly relevant to the God code.
But will we get that answer, Greg? Why are we here?
I think we will find the evidence of the circumstances, the actual reason, I think, is something that we have to find for ourselves. I think we're
individually.
I think that's what we're going to find. A good friend of mine was watching the movie The Matrix. I know a lot of our
Great
viewers have
movie.
seen
I
it.
love it.
Well,
I've cited that on the radio show a lot.
I love it as well. It's one that I have by the TV, and when I'm writing into the wee hours of the morning, there's 2 movies. I don't watch them all the way through, but
Contact and Matrix.
How'd you know that?
Because it's the same with me.
And I don't watch them all the way through, but I like the part where they solve the codes, because I think there's a lot to that. And where does that come from anyway? So my friend said, you think it's science fiction. He said, Matrix is actually a documentary about us and the way things work in the world. So it may be that by working backward through the code, we do arrive at the doorstep of an architect at some point.
If you could get an answer to one question, what would that question be?
I think it's the question we're asking right now. Why us? Why here? Why now? There's another branch of work that this follows up on, and it is the study of whether or not we are living in a simulation or a virtual reality. And there is a degree course in one of the large Eastern universities in philosophy that you can take, and the title of the course is Are We Living a Simulation? And to make a long story very brief, what they did was they took a very complex computer algorithm, plugged in all kinds of variables about human population and trajectories and economies and families and religious beliefs, all about life. And the bottom line is there's over a 93% chance that we are living a simulation. Now, if you step into a simulation, a virtual environment in Disneyland, you can do that today and not even really know that that's where you are. And we've only had computers about 60 years. If you take the archaeology that's showing the existence of advanced technological civilizations thousands of years, where would we be if we had thousands of years of computer science to build that kind of simulation? And the question comes, why would we do this? And the answer for me is that every simulation is built to help the people in the simulation become very well adapted to somewhere that they're going to be when the simulation no longer exists. The simulation is a safe place to make mistakes and learn that power if we are in fact on Earth living a simulation. And our most cherished traditions tell us that we're on our way somewhere else. This isn't it, this is an illusion, this is temporary. In general they say that. Then I think we have to look at what those traditions are telling us, and they're teaching us about our relationship to reality, to quantum reality, to emotions and the emotions of the heart, to create and heal in our bodies and the world around us. And if we master those, maybe that's what this simulation is all about. God eternal within the body may be the architect that has helped to create this simulation.
Do you ever get frustrated that we don't have the answers yet?
I don't, George. I don't, because what it tells me is, and what I've come to understand, is that when we are truly ready for that information, it's right there. Sometimes, this is a perfect example. This has been around, for 200,000 years. But it's only when
to be discovered, though, by those who look.
Or when our technology reaches the point that it gives us the tools to take a peek.
It's almost like that code we sent out on one of the Viking craft, right? Which Stephen Hawking said, don't do, because he's afraid that they'll come here, and he's not so sure they're very benevolent.
Yeah, it was interesting. I actually talk about that code in the book, The God Code. What is it that we said? Who did we write it to?
And who finds it?
And how would it be interpreted?
Yeah.
So it makes perfect sense to me. If we are the product of an intentional an intentional creation, that the Creator, who or whatever that is, would somehow leave a mark, letting us know when we have the ability to find that.
That is brilliant.
And I can't think of a more honoring way to honor who or what that Creator is than to take that code, read it, and maybe communicate back the other way. And I think we are on our way to doing that.
I think so too. Greg, thanks for being on Beyond
George,
Belief.
thank you for
You're
for
so
this.
enlightening. You really are.
I've
You
enjoyed
bring
this
us just a
tremendously.
different perspective to just about everything we've talked about over the years. I appreciate it.
I appreciate you. Thank you for today.
You know, as we've talked, do we get that answer? Who are we? Why are we here? Sometimes I wonder, you know, maybe we won't get that answer, but we'll continue striving for it.
Hello, my name's Gregg Braden, and I'd like to welcome you to this all-new presentation of the Divine Matrix, Bridging Time, Space, Miracles, and Belief. In the last episode of this program, we saw how a 3,000-year-old map of time holds the key to what's possible in the world as well as our lives. In this episode, we'll cross the traditional boundaries that have separated physics and biology in the past to reveal the superhuman potential of what is now being recognized as an internal technology, and how we can use our inner technology to bypass, to hack the limits of what we believed was possible for us in the past. A new school of thought suggests that consciousness informs itself through its creations, through its art, music, books, and movies. With this idea in mind, when we look at the themes of some of the most popular movies of our time, what are those movies telling us about ourselves? If consciousness is informing us of something that we need to know about ourselves through the things that we create to remind ourselves of ourselves, what are those films telling us? Well, examples include hugely popular movies like The Matrix, for example, or Avatar, or the movie Inception. What are films like these saying to us? What part of our reality are they reminding us of? Well, if we look at the common themes, they'll give us a clue. As different as they are from one another, each of these movies is suggesting, number one, that there is a world that exists we simply cannot see from our limited perspective. But this world influences our everyday lives. Number two, we're told that we're limited in our lives only until we wake up to the parameters of this unseen world. Number three, they're telling us that everyone has the ability to do just that, to wake up and to transcend the limits of their lives that begin with the events in the world that we can't even see. The success of a recent movie, the 2017 movie Arrival, is another beautiful example of what I mean here. And it opens the door to precisely what I want to talk about in this episode. The theme of The Arrival is so powerful, maybe one of the most powerful, underrated, and perhaps hopeful messages seen in modern times. Because beyond the theme of the ETs and of the conflict and UFOs and the special effects, what the movie is saying to us is that there's a message, and the message is very, very simple. The message says that the language that we use in our everyday lives determines the way our brain connects the neurons, and in turn, the way that we think and even what we think about. I'm going to invite you to think about what I just said. This movie is suggesting somehow that the words that we use to communicate day in and day out, they're more than simply words, that they actually are directly linked to the neurons in our brain. Now, if you've ever thought about the power of just being able to speak, I'd like to share with you just how potent that ability is unto itself, and that will lead us into the power of the language itself. When we speak, when we say the words to convey what it is that we're thinking and feeling in our lives, what we're really doing is a series of steps that begins with one of the most intimate acts that we could ever imagine. We invite into the deepest recesses of our bodies the breath of life from the world beyond our bodies. We breathe in what is called the sacred breath. We breathe it into our bodies and we draw it deep into our diaphragm. And once that breath is in the diaphragm, we begin to massage that breath with our diaphragm, with the muscles in our diaphragm in a very precise way. We flutter the diaphragm just the right way to now direct the air back from where it just came, back through the passages, over the muscles in our throat that vibrate and undulate in just the right way at just the right time to create the acoustic vibrations that allow what we were thinking to be emitted from our body, from our mouth, back into the air around us as messages that become precisely that, the messages that are interpreted through the eardrums of the people that we're speaking with. Wow, when you think about that, what masters we are. What masters we are at the communication. But what our ancestors are telling us is that the language that we are using to convey that sacred acoustic vibration, that language is really where the action is. So the English language, as well as many others, is based upon principles of separation. And that separation is reflected in the ideas that it embraces. Separate and isolated thinking about things like you versus me, or them versus us. We think about winners and losers. This is the language of conflict and war. Language based in connection creates a very, very different kind of experience, different kind of thinking. A language based in connection is unity thinking. This is the language of evolution, of community, of cooperation. So the bottom line to what I'm saying to you here is that we change the language, we change the brain, or stated another way, change the language. Change the way the brain accesses the matrix. Well, these ideas are central to the theme of the arrival. And here's what I mean. A growing body of scientific evidence now suggests that we do not hold memory in the neurons in our bodies. We now know we have neurons in the heart as well as the brain. But what these discoveries are showing us is that those neurons are not what contain the memory. Rather, the neurons we can think of as antenna, biological antenna, soft antenna, that tune to the place in the field, in the matrix, where our memories actually reside. Now, this idea is more than just a metaphor, it's more than just a theory. What I'm saying to you is so real that engineers are actually now beginning to design the next generation of computer chips based precisely upon this idea. When engineers were working with futuristic technologies and were saying, where is our computer technology going to go? One of the things they discovered is that the silica that we've used in the past has limitations for the amount of information that can be stored on that silicon chip. So they began looking to nature. Where in nature can we find the material that could contain the vast amounts of information that we're now beginning to access? And they chose water. The new chips are actually based upon a single droplet of water. Now, this isn't tap water from the bathroom. It's highly refined, highly structured water compressed into a chip that interfaces with the machine, with the computer as we know it today. When the researchers began filling these chips with information, what happened was there was so much information that was being stored, they said this droplet of water cannot possibly store that amount of information. They were pumping tremendous amounts, libraries of information into this chip. And the mystery was, where's the information being stored? And they realized that the information was not confined to the droplet of water. The information was being held in a field that is linked to that droplet of water. The information was actually being held in a field that extended beyond the machine itself. I know this is a very different way of thinking, but this is how we learn. This is how science arrives at the new understandings that lead us to deeper understandings, perhaps the deepest truths of our existence. So the information doesn't live in our brains, it doesn't live in our hearts, it doesn't live in our cells. The information is stored in the world around us. And because of that, the way we access that information plays a very, very powerful role in our lives. So I'd like to share a story, and this is a true story, of precisely what the information I just shared with you means in our lives. I live in an artist community, a very creative community in northern New Mexico. A lot of artists, visual artists, sculptors, musicians, writers, all come together in the beauty of the high desert of northern New Mexico to create what they create. And it's always been that way. George O'Keeffe, for example, Ansel Adams made their home, D.H. Lawrence, they all made their homes in this part of the world because it supports this creative spirit. Well, one of the interesting things that I've seen in my community, and if you're an artist, you may have experienced this as well, is that a lot of times the artists have a hard time supporting themselves through their creations. So they end up with other jobs to make the income that allows them to create the things that they love. And the story I'm going to share with you is a story of precisely such an artist, but it relates to the way information is stored in the field and what it can mean to a creation. So I had a dear friend of mine, a musician, keyboard artist, who had just created one of the most awesomely beautiful, mystical, compelling, intriguing pieces of music that I had ever heard. And I said, wow, I can't wait until that becomes available. Well, to my musician friend, it wasn't ready for the world. He said, you know, I like what I've done. He said, but it's not quite ready for the world yet. He says, I'm going to take it in the studio and do some more work. So he would go into the studio, he'd spend all of his money honing and refining this masterful piece of work, and he'd run out of money. And then he would spend 6 months working in a restaurant or in a bar somewhere, saving enough money to go back into the studio so he could work and refine and hone this again and again and again. This went on for over a year. So I had an event, speaking event, in the Los Angeles area. My friend picked me up at the Los Angeles airport at LAX, and we got into the car and I turned on the radio. And when I turned on the radio, my friend's music was playing on the radio. Not the words to the song, but the music that he had been working on, that he'd been honing and refining for months. And he looked at me and he said, that's my song. And I said, well, that was your song. I said, the universe tapped you on the shoulder. The universe directed you with inspiration. You were given the gift of this song to share with the world, and you felt that the world wasn't quite ready, or maybe the music wasn't ready to share with the world yet. But once you anchored your creation in the field, it wasn't held in the cells of your brain or your heart. It's in the field around us. And what that means, it's available for anyone who is tuned into that place in the field. There are other creative people out there, creative people who are reaching deep within themselves to create something new, to create something, a new, higher expression of whatever it is. And it is their desire to create. It is them reaching within themselves to create that actually allows them access to the field where your music was living. So you didn't share your music with the universe, but the universe made sure that it was out there. And this was a very, very powerful lesson for my friend. I've had the same experience when it comes to book titles, for example. I've anchored very, very good titles for the books, and I said, you know, I'm not ready to write that book yet. 2 months, 3 months later, somebody else, I look on Amazon, and there is that book title, that exact book title, and even the same subtitle that I never shared with anyone. How did that happen? It's in the field. And the reason I'm sharing this with you right now, and I want to speak directly to you, is because each of you have a creative impulse. And when the universe gives you the gift of a creation and taps you on the shoulder and says, here is something to share with the world, that inspiration means the world is ready for your creation in that moment. And I'm going to invite you, please share your gifts with the world, because we need what you're creating. You never know how your creation is going to influence or impact someone in this world when you share it with them. But the fact that you have that inspiration tells me that the world is ready for whatever it is you've created. So please share your creations with the world. When we create, here's what's happening on a biological level, and this is going to be a direct segue into the power of language in our lives. The act of you creating, the act of you reaching deep inside of your being, reaching deep to bring something new forward, the act of you striving to create and become something more in the next minute than you were 1 minute ago, that act is the biological trigger that is the impetus for your neurons to begin to wire in a way that will support what it is that you've chosen to create. So let me just give you an example of this. I'm a musician, I'm a guitar player. Have been all my life since I was 8 years old is when I began. When I want to learn how to play like another guitar player, one of the most influential guitar players in my life was a man named Michael Hedges. Michael Hedges passed a few years ago. He was a Windham Hill artist. And I saw him live. I saw him play live, and I went up to the stage and he took the time to talk to me. He was very kind to me. A very, very powerful impact on my life. Michael Hedges, when I saw him play, he blew all of the constructs, all of the rules of the way I've been taught classically to play guitar. He blew those rules right out of the water. He gave me the freedom of expression, and I respect him and I loved him so much. I was so sorry when he left this world. So when I want to play like Michael Hedges, and I listen to his songs again and again, at first it's very mechanical. But there's a point, and maybe you've had this experience, if you're trying to learn a language, French or Spanish, or you're trying to solve a mathematic problem, you're going through the motions, and all of a sudden one morning you wake up and you're speaking French, you're speaking Spanish, you're thinking the language of the mathematicians, you're thinking the language of Michael Hedges, and all of a sudden you know where those chord progressions work. When that happens, here's what you've done. What you've done is the act of you striving to achieve that expression is what triggers the neurons in your body to actually find other neurons to grow and find other neurons. The image you're seeing on your screen right now is a single isolated neuron looking for another neuron that it can hook up with. They're very social. They want to hook up, these neurons. And what you're seeing on your screen is what happens to many neurons when you are doing this. It is the act of you striving to create that triggers the neurons to fire the way they fire. This has a direct impact and a direct consequence when it comes to language and the words that we use to express ourselves in our lives. So one of the first scientific links to what I'm talking about here, the link between the language that we use and our biology, the way that our neurons fire, was made early in the 20th century by a linguist. His name was Benjamin Lee Whorf. And the ideas that Benjamin Whorf shared in the world of linguistics, in the world of science, they were radical for his time. And what he said is this. Number one, he said that the way that we speak actually influences the way that we think. But perhaps even more importantly, number two, he said the way that we speak influences what we think. That our thoughts, what we are capable of thinking, are actually linked to the way our neurons are being wired. One of the reasons that Whorf came to this conclusion was because of the work that he was doing with an indigenous people in North America, northern Arizona, the Hopi. And what he found was that the language of the Hopi, when that language was translated into English, what he found is that the Hopi have a very, very different way of thinking about us, about nature, about our relationship to the world, and specifically about time. So here we are back at time. Time is the program that allows us to live our lives as we do within the operating system of the divine matrix. What Whorf found was that in the Hopi language, they see everything as alive, everything is connected, everything is present and now. From the Hopi perspective, there are only two realms of possibility. One is the realm of things that are manifesting in the present, and one is the realm of things that are already manifest. The Hopi do not think about time the way that we think about time. From their perspective, the manifest is everything that has already happened. It's everything that we can sense, everything that we can experience. It's what's already occurred in the world. From this perspective, the manifesting is what is unfolding in this moment and is actually called in the language the spirit of the breath. It includes whatever is unfolding in the moment now as well as what's possible in the future. Now, these may seem like insignificant changes that I'm talking about between the way that the Hopi think and the way we think, but they have very powerful implications. Let me talk to you about the concept of time in the Hopi language. In Hopi, there is no time as we know it. There's only now. And what Worf found when he was exploring the language is that there were no nouns in the Hopi language to specifically refer to the past or the future. Everything is present. Everything is happening right now. So for example, the idea of a wave, when we look at the wave in an ocean, we say, look at that wave. For the Hopi, it's impossible to see one wave in a moment in time and call it a wave. Because it is happening now, the word is waving. When they are looking at the wave, we say, look at the wave, but we know there are other waves out there. The Hopi say that the ocean is waving. They actually have a word, they say wa la lata, meaning the plural waving is occurring, the plural waving. So in a very real sense, their language is more accurate than ours, describing what the waves are doing, although it feels awkward to us because of the way we're wired to think. So the Hopi are using the same words to describe what is or what has already happened. They're describing a quantum possibility that has already become manifest while leaving the future open for other manifestations and other possibilities. Well, when we look at the movie The Arrival from this perspective, it opens up a whole new realm of possibilities because this is the central theme to the movie. In the movie, humankind, through the language of separation, was on the brink of war, on the brink of destruction in the modern world because of the weapons we have and the kind of war that was possible. And it's precisely at this moment in time when a new language is introduced to the world. Now, in the movie, it happened to come from another world, and that was the ET perspective. But there is a growing body of scientific evidence that suggests something very similar to what happened in The Arrival has already happened here on Earth. That didn't necessarily come from another world in our time. It may have been left to us in the past. Right now, there are 23 examples of ancient texts, ancient languages that were given to the people of the earth that to this day cannot be translated. We don't know what they say. And the reason I'm sharing this is because just like the indigenous language of the Hopi is a language of connection, and when the Hopi speak in the language of connection, it wires their brain to see the world from a place of connectivity, of unity, of aliveness, of cooperation. It's very possible that at least one, if not many, of the languages that have been left in the past provide precisely the same idea with an alphabet that helps us to find this place of unity. And we go back and we think about this growing body of evidence that suggests that consciousness informs itself through its creations. The movie Arrival is perhaps mirroring to us what has already happened in our past, or the potential of what we can embrace in the future simply by recognizing the power of our language to change our biology. Such a different way of thinking. The power of the words we use again and again to trigger the neurons in our brain and in our heart, to find other neurons to wire together so that we become networks of peace, networks of cooperation, networks of unity, rather than the networks of separation, competition, and conflict that we've achieved in the past through the use of the language that was given to us a very long time ago. So maybe it's no accident that the movie Arrival has arrived in our world precisely when it has arrived in our world. Step back and look at the big picture. We're living a time of extremes. We're living a time unlike any time in 5,000 years of recorded human history, when huge natural cycles that include the cycles of climate, the cycles of economy, the cycles of human conflict, each of them are converging at the same time into an experience that we've never seen before, and at the same time that has happened, the people of the world are being pushed together across the boundaries that we've known in the past of oceans, of mountains, the borders between countries. People of the world are coming together And we're learning what it means to live amidst different cultures, different religions, different ways of thinking, different ways of treating men, different ways of treating women. All of this is happening within the context of the big picture of these converging cycles. At the very time when our differences have led to the brink of war in the world today, at the very instant, maybe it's no accident that the movie arrived to remind us of the power of the language to change the way we think about ourselves and our relationship to one another. And we think about it from that perspective. In addition to being an awesome movie and one of my favorites, the question that it begs for me, and I'm going to invite you to think of the same question. If our words are a reflection of what's happening in the world, and our words are directing our biology and the way our neurons fire, what words are you feeding into the field? What words are you feeding into the matrix? What words are you using to direct your biology? And when you become conscious of the language that you're using from this perspective, it opens up a whole new realm of possibilities, and that is the power of the divine matrix and the power of understanding our language and the role of our language to direct the possibilities within that matrix. Through the wisdom preserved in some of our most ancient and cherished indigenous and spiritual traditions, we can now think of language as the user interface for the operating system of our lives, the divine matrix. Well, in the next episode, we'll dive directly into the physics of the matrix itself to discover how to transform the hurtful creations in our lives and the healthy outcomes of relationship and even healing. I want to thank you for joining me for today's program, and be sure to tune in to our next all-new episode of The Divine Matrix, Bridging Time, Space, Miracles, and Belief. My name's Gregg Braden, and I'd like to welcome you to this very special presentation of Missing Links, the deep truth of our origin, history, destiny, and fate. In our last episode, we identified the science-based discovery of a field of energy, a real-life matrix that functions in three very precise ways. This matrix, number one, it's the container for the universe itself and for all things that can happen in the universe. Number two, it's the bridge between our inner and our outer worlds. Everything that happens from within, our thoughts, feelings, emotions, and beliefs are conveyed to the world beyond our bodies through this field. And number three, the mirror. The mirror. This field is a mirror in the world for what we claim to be true in our deepest, sometimes subconscious beliefs. Well, scientists are no longer asking the question, are we connected? The field tells us that we are. Now, the question is, how deeply are we connected? How much influence do we really have in the world through this field? Well, there are two very futuristic scientific experiments that take us light years beyond anything that we've believed and science has accepted in the past. I want to share those with you. What they are showing, however, has opened the door to a possibility that modern science is now struggling with. So let's take a look at these two experiments. The first one was published in the Russian Bulletin of the Lebedev Physics Institute in 1992. And the experiment begins with something seemingly very innocent, a glass vessel, a vase, where all of the air has been completely drawn out of this vessel to create what we call a vacuum. So a vacuum implies that this vessel is empty, but we know it's not completely empty because there are still little photons of light that remain in this vessel. Scientists know this. So the question now is, where are those photons? They want to get a baseline and see where the photons are right now. So the first part of this experiment, they draw the air out of the vessel, and then they measure where these photons are in the vessel. Are they all piled up on the bottom, or are they floating around the inside, or are they all stuck to the edges? And what they found was no surprise. The vessel showed that these photons are completely random. They're completely random. By the way, these are the same kinds of photons, the particles of matter that make up the atom itself, that we described in the last episode. So we're dealing with these fundamental particles
of the stuff that our world is made of, and that's important. So the scientists found that the distribution of the photons in this vessel was completely random. No surprise, that's what they expected. The next piece of this experiment is where, while the experiment is fascinating, what I find really fascinating is the thinking of the scientists that made the experiment possible. For a scientist trained in the scientific method, based upon all of those false assumptions that we saw earlier in this program, those assumptions of separation, for the scientists to move out of that box of thinking and begin asking new questions like, what if our assumptions are wrong? What would that tell us about our world? That's where it gets really interesting, and that's what the next part of this experiment is all about. Because what the scientists did was, into the vessel that had completely random photons, they put human DNA. Human DNA, because they wanted to see if human DNA has an effect on the photons. And before I go any further, I'm going to invite you to think about what they're asking. Photons are the stuff this world is made of. DNA is the stuff we're made of. And they're asking, scientists are asking in the laboratory, does the stuff we're made of have an effect on the stuff our world is made of? This is where it starts to sound like science fiction, or at least something that an advanced yogi would be working with. But these are in a bona fide scientific laboratory, these questions, this is where they're being asked. So here's what they did. They took human DNA and they placed it inside the vessel. And then they measured the DNA again to see what would happen. And they measured the photons again to see what would happen. And the results of this experiment changed the way we have been conditioned to think about ourselves and the world. Because the photons went from being completely random when they were first measured, and in the presence of the human DNA, the photons are no longer random, they are ordered. They followed precisely the geometry of the DNA. The DNA was having a direct effect on the photons. The stuff we're made of is having a direct effect on the stuff our world is made of. Just like some of our most ancient and cherished indigenous and spiritual traditions have always told us that we are connected to the world. So this is the first experiment. Human DNA has a measurable effect on the stuff our world is made of. Now I want you to see the way the scientists responded to this. So I'm going to read this to you directly. In the journal Nanobiology, it was published in 1995, the way the scientists described this, they said that the photons were described as behaving, and this is a quote, surprisingly and counterintuitively. Counterintuitively. It's counterintuitive because the scientific thinking is that everything is separate from everything else, and there is no stuff to convey any effect from the DNA to the matter. That's why it's counterintuitive to the science. But the next piece is what I find particularly interesting. I'm going to invite you to listen to the language. It says we are forced to accept the possibility. They're saying that they are forced. They're not saying it looks like, or it appears, or this is what we found. They're saying we are forced to accept the possibility that some new field of energy is being excited by the DNA. Well, I think we know it's not a new field. It's a field that's been around a long time. It's simply that we are just now recognizing that field and what it means to us. So the summary of this second experiment is that science now confirms that human DNA influences the stuff our world is made of through the photons by communicating directly through the field. That's a big piece. But now let me go to the second experiment. This experiment was published in the Journal of Scientific Exploration in 1994. It begins with human DNA once again, and this is a very precise kind of human DNA. It comes from umbilical cords of newborns because that DNA is what's called very pristine DNA. It hasn't been eroded over time, as happens as we mature in life. So it's a very pristine kind of DNA. And the DNA is isolated in one vessel, and that is encased in another vessel to make sure that there are no other influences that are happening from outside to influence the DNA. So here is the experiment. This very unique DNA is now placed within the range of the field of a human heart that we described in an earlier episode. Every human heart, if you recall, has a field of energy that extends beyond the physical heart for a distance between 5 to 8 feet. And that field, it is an electrical and a magnetic field that we can measure with conventional equipment. So the question is, through that field, is the DNA influenced by the emotions of another person? Can our emotions actually influence the DNA in our bodies? Before I tell you the experiment, let me just share a little bit about why this is important. Human DNA, when it is in our cells, it is coiled in very specific kinds of ways. And what scientists have found is that in the presence of certain emotions that we would call negative emotions, and I don't really like to use that term, but I'm going to use it to be clear on what we're talking about. So when we talk about emotions, for example, of anger or hate or jealousy or rage or frustration, those that we would typically consider as negative emotions, they have an effect on the DNA within our bodies. And the effect is that in the presence of those emotions, the DNA is actually, the coil is tightened. It's tightened like a little knot. And that's important because when it is tightened in this way, the DNA does not express to its fullest capacity. So the negative emotions tighten the coil and prevent the DNA from expressing the fullest capacity of whatever it is that it is expressing, whether it's our immune response or our anti-aging hormones or whatever it is. The DNA simply cannot do its full complement of what it's designed to do. So from this description, you can probably imagine what the positive emotions do. Positive emotions actually loosen the DNA. They relax the DNA. So these are the emotions of compassion, gratitude, appreciation, for example. Those kinds of emotions actually relax the DNA within our bodies and allow that fullest expression. Knowing this, the scientists wanted to see what effect human emotion from one person would have upon DNA that's not in that person's body, but it's in this special container that was designed. So that's the experiment. Here's what they found. The human DNA was isolated, and in the presence of the positive emotions, in the presence of the gratitude, appreciation, love, and compassion, what happened was the DNA actually began to relax, and it relaxed so much that it began to unwind itself. The two coils began to unwind as if the DNA was about to replicate itself and produce a new strand of DNA in the presence of positive emotion. All that was happening was gratitude, appreciation, care, compassion, and the DNA was responding in such a positive manner that the DNA acted, again, as if it was about to reproduce itself in a new, vitalized, healed state. So this is something that scientists were not expecting. So now we've seen the results of these two experiments. In the presence of the positive emotion, the DNA is relaxed. In the presence of negative emotions such as anger, hate, jealousy, rage, the DNA was tightened like a little knot. It coiled up very, very tightly. And this is telling the scientists something that we've never seen demonstrated under laboratory conditions before. Anecdotally, it may have been suspected, but this is the first time in a laboratory environment that we could actually see human emotion intentionally created by those trained to create very specific kinds and very specific qualities of emotion. The human emotion changed the shape of the DNA. It changed the ability of the DNA to fully express the full complement of what it is, whatever that DNA is expressing. So I'm going to share with you now directly. I want you to hear from the scientists. Quote, individuals trained in feelings of deep love and appreciation were able to intentionally change the shape of the DNA in their bodies. And they went on to say that human emotion produces effects which defy conventional laws of physics. Now, what are those results saying to us? It's saying that when we embrace the deepest truth, the power that is available to us, when we tap the fullest potential that we have available to us, that we are not bound by the conventional laws of physics, at least as we have known those laws in the past. Maybe the laws of physics are going to change, but the fact that we have the ability to feel a certain way, to create a certain emotion in our body and literally change the DNA within us, and in the case of the experiment that was not even part of us, that tells a new story. And here's what this story is all about. So I'm going to invite you now, think about these two experiments. First experiment, human emotion changes the shape of the DNA, and you saw that. The second experiment is that DNA changes physical matter. The DNA influenced the photons that were in the vessel. If you take out the middle piece, human emotion changes DNA, DNA changes matter. If you take it out, the overlapping statements of DNA, what we find is this: human emotion changes matter. Human emotion influences the stuff our world is made of. And as we learn to embrace the qualities of feeling and emotion that change the DNA in our bodies, not only does it influence the healing in our own bodies, as you'll see in future episodes, not only does it influence the DNA in additional ways, as you're going to see in future episodes, it literally taps, it influences the stuff our world is made of in ways that sound superhuman. It sounds like something that a yogi studying in a monastery on a high mountaintop half a world away for a lifetime would be able to do. But the beauty of these experiments is that we don't have to do that. We don't have to leave everything that we love and all the people and the experiences that live in a monastery on a mountaintop for a lifetime or two to embrace what these technologies are all about. And this is precisely what we are talking about. This is a technology. It is an internal technology that is available to every human if we choose to embrace it in our lives. So, what have we learned from these experiments? We now know, science confirms, human emotion influences the field that connects all things and the stuff our world is made of. When we study physics, traditional physics, one of the great mysteries of the physics as we know it today has to do with the outcome of yet another experiment. This experiment was first performed in 1909 at the turn of the 20th century. And at that time, scientists, they didn't know what to make of this experiment. Prior to 1909, physics was mechanistic. They're called Newtonian physics, classical physics. It was all about things bumping up against other things, electrons and atoms and neutrons. But the new physics that was developing at the time, through the theories that were being developed in late 1800s and early 1900s, that physics said that there's something else that's happening, that on the level of things that are very small and the level of things that are very huge, in terms of galaxies and in terms of very, very small particles, there's another physics that's working, that's the quantum physics. And the experiment that I'm talking about was known as the very, very famous double slit experiment performed in 1909. And the mystery is because the result of the double slit experiment actually is determined by whether or not someone is watching the experiment. Okay? So let me say that again. Let me tell you how this experiment works. The double slit experiment, it begins as a beam of photons, and you see a common theme here. We're talking about photons. They are the elementary stuff that atoms are made of, the stuff our world is made of. You and I are made of photons. Our world is made of photons, so it's not surprising that they would be used a lot throughout these experiments. So in the double slit experiment, a beam of light, photons, particles of light, was fired from a device, and it was fired at a barrier, and the barrier had 2 slits on either side. And what scientists expected to see was that once the light hit the barrier, it would go through both of the slits, and we would be able to see the patterns that it was creating in a very expected way on the other side. Well, this is where the mystery comes in. Because what scientists found is that when the light hit the barrier and it went through and it was being observed. Now, the observer could be another human, it could be a device watching it, but somehow the observation actually determined how those particles of light would behave. When no one and nothing was observing, the particles would behave in one way. When someone or a gadget was recording, the particles would behave in another way. And here's the difference. Under one set of circumstances, the particles remained particles. On another set of circumstances, the particles became waves. So now we're talking on a quantum level about the difference between the particles and waves. It's the same energy expressing in very, very different forms. Now, this is going to be really important because what we have just done is we've talked about the ability of humans to create the emotion that influences their DNA. It influences the stuff our world is made of. And now we're talking about the stuff our world is made of behaves differently. Sometimes it's a particle, sometimes it's a wave, depending on whether or not it's being observed. The implications for healing, the implications for prayer, the implications for remote healing within the context of these discoveries take on a whole new meaning. And if you think about this, we know scientifically that prayer has an effect. Many studies have been done, and the question was, how could a prayer in one person's living room for their loved one, their son or their daughter, their mother or father in a battlefield of Afghanistan, half a world away, how could the prayer have any influence on the other side of the planet? And yet it does. Statistically, what the studies were showing was that people fared better when they were ill or when they underwent a surgery. Those that had people praying for them fared better, recovered faster, had less trauma, less bleeding, less swelling, less bruising than those that did not. These are very, very well documented studies. So I'm not going to spend a lot of time on those. The question is, why does it happen? How does it happen? That's what we're spending time on. Because we're going to take this now to the next level. We're going to take it even further than we have in the past, because it begins to tie in to what we have called miracles in the past. You know, a miracle is only a miracle until we understand the science underlying what's happening. Then it becomes a technology, and it's something that we all have available to us. Although the observer effect was first documented during the first double-slit experiments early in the 20th century, as happens so often with these very important experiments, this particular experiment was repeated later in the century using even better equipment with new ideas and new understandings. And I'd like to share with you precisely the exact language of what the scientists at the Weizmann Research Institute discovered when they repeated the double-slit experiment. In 1998, scientific headlines all over the world reported this experiment. And they read, and this is a quote, "Researchers at the Weizmann Institute of Science conducted a highly controlled experiment demonstrating how a beam of electrons, so these are quantum particles, a beam of electrons is affected by the act of being observed." But even beyond that observation effect, that was noted early in the century. But listen to this. Listen to the new portion of this discovery. The scientists said, quote, "The experiment revealed that the greater the amount of watching, the greater the observer's influence on what actually takes place," end of quote. And this was actually reported in the very prestigious journal Nature, February 26, 1998, volume 391, if you want to look it up for yourself. This experiment is telling us that not only are we intimately enmeshed with the world around us and with the world within us. But the more focus, the greater our focus, the greater the attention that we give, specifically something that is happening in our lives, the greater the effect. But I think this is interesting because we already knew this if we followed the principles in some of our most ancient, again, and cherished spiritual traditions. For example, in the sutra from the Mahayana Buddhist traditions, there is a statement that essentially summarizes what the Weitzman experience just told us. And that statement says, quote, "Reality exists only where the mind creates a focus." Reality exists only where the mind creates a focus. So the ancient Buddhist traditions, they didn't have the science, but they sure understood the principle, they understood the mechanism. Where we create this convergence of thought, feeling, and emotion, where we create that focus, that is us observing the world around us. And it is that experience and the fact that that experience has such a powerful effect in our lives that actually made Albert Einstein, it was making him crazy. This is the piece of the puzzle that Einstein was never able to solve. He began early in the 20th century with his theories of relativity, and he was always searching for a unified theory, a unified field theory. And here's what I mean by that. In a unified field theory, it's where a scientist like Albert Einstein creates a single story that incorporates all of the facets of nature and physics and mathematics into one coherent story of us, our universe, and our relationship to it. The unified field theory has been an elusive theory. It is yet to be discovered. Einstein and the world supported Einstein, thinking that this is the man. If anyone could do it, he could do it. Here's where Einstein got stuck. And he actually admitted this on his deathbed in the early 1950s. He got stuck because he did not like the idea that we are so intimately connected with our universe that we could have any influence whatsoever on the universe in one place with us being in another place. And as I mentioned earlier, he actually had a name. He called this spooky action at a distance. He called this spooky action at a distance because to him it was spooky. One of the things I find particularly fascinating is that although Einstein was working with the same mathematics and the same equations as his friends and colleagues, he came to the conclusion that we are separate from one another and that we are separate from the universe and that we can be observers in the universe. However, a dear friend and colleague of Albert Einstein's, a man that lived much longer than Einstein and had a tremendously powerful influence in quantum physics at Princeton University in our world today, was Professor John Wheeler. He passed away just a few years ago. So John Wheeler and Albert Einstein, they were friends, they were colleagues, looking at the same equations, the same math, drawing vastly different conclusions. So while Einstein believed that we're separate and have no effect, Wheeler said just the opposite. And I want to share with you John Wheeler's exact words, just so you can hear his process and his thinking and how passionate he was about this. John Wheeler said, we had this old idea that there is a universe out there somewhere. And here's man, he called the observer, safely protected from the universe by what he called a 6-inch slab of plate glass. Okay, so it's not really plate glass, but that is his way of saying that there is something between us and the universe out there. But he continues. He said, now we learn that to even observe an electron, we have to shatter that plate glass. Listen to what he said. He said, so the old word observer simply has to be crossed off the books. He said, there are no observers. We must put in the new word participator. No observers, only participators. So what does this mean? I'm going to just very, very quickly encapsulate this idea and why it's so powerful in our lives. Because what John Wheeler has just said to us tells us that we will never find the smallest particle of matter, no matter how many atoms and quantum particles that we smash into one another and break into a bajillion pieces looking for smaller and smaller pieces, and we will never find the edge of the universe, no matter how far we look to the edge of the cosmos and how technologically sophisticated our equipment is. And here's the reason why. What John Wheeler just said to us is that every place that we look into the universe, every place that we look into nature with the expectation that something is there for us to see, the expectation is the principle that will put something there for us to see. So no matter how far, no matter how deep, as long as we're looking, the act of looking is the act of creation that makes sure there will always be something there for us to see. So what we've just witnessed are the science-based experiments and a real-life application of these experiments that not only confirm that we are deeply connected to the world, but also confirm that that connection is so fundamental. It begins at the very core of our existence with our DNA, where we interact with life and reality itself. In our next episode, let's take this one step further. We'll discover that the source of our connection is directly linked to the origin of the DNA in our bodies. And that's what sets us apart from all other life. Thank you for joining me for this program today, and be sure to tune in for our next all-new episode of Missing Links, the deep truth of our origin, history, destiny, and fate.